Welcome, David. We're really excited to have you here today and learn more about how coaching programs can improve the lives and careers of neurodiverse people. You do some great work, so let's dive into it. So first, can you tell us a little bit about your own experience with neurodiversity and how that's informed the work that you do?
I'd be glad to. Thank you, Gabby. Also, Hunter, thank you so much for that wonderful bridging, that intro. That was extremely helpful. Let's see, where to start? Well, so I am the parent of three persons diagnosed on the autism spectrum. So I start with that foundational experience because I've made a tremendous amount of mistakes in my own journey in engaging and helping to build bridges for my own kids. I'm quite happy to say that they're all doing quite well. In fact, my youngest just entered engineering school at UTSA in San Antonio yesterday. So, but early on, during those struggles, I began to have this sneaking suspicion that that the resources, the things available to autistic persons, were not matching with their needs. And about 5 years ago, I was at a bit of a crossroads, and I decided to look into what resources there were for autistic persons, neurodivergent persons. And what I discovered was an extreme chasm existed between the needs and the resources. Now, there were a lot of resources, but I was particularly interested in looking at outcomes. And just to be very direct with all of you, the outcomes, and things have gotten a little bit better, but the outcomes at that point were really disastrous. We were looking at a lot of anxiety, chronic depression, joblessness, which has still hovered above 70% range, including soft unemployment for autistic neurodivergent persons. And finally, and there's been some research on this in the last 3 years, quite awfully, an extremely high rate of suicide among neurodivergent autistic persons, ranging in the level of 9 times the national average. So I knew after I had done that research that something dramatic, something meaningful had to be done, and it had to be done soon. And, my first impulse was to think, well, I'll just help out those people who are doing those things. And what I discovered was there wasn't any. Now, things have gotten better. There are now some individuals and groups who are doing some very engaging, meaningful things, but at that time it was pretty slim. And so I created a methodology. I call it E3. Our board members, volunteers, coaches call it E3. They're probably tired of hearing this, but that's okay. I keep it up, right? E3, what does it mean? First of all, is engagement. So in engagement, we're building unique bridges for autistic persons and neurodivergent persons. That is based on individuals. It's based on their needs. It's not a cookie cutter approach. It's not something that we sort of say, hey, here's your formula for success. We don't do that. We don't treat people like that. And through engagement, whether it's social aspects, career, et cetera, we've been able to see some really dramatic and powerful success stories through that. Secondly is equipping. I really don't subscribe to this idea of A to Z equipping for all persons. Again, back to the uniqueness, back to the needs of each person. One of my favorite stories to share is that of a person who never learned to tie their shoes. In fact, I've got a couple of pictures. I found some old archive pictures of them wearing socks over their shoes. They pull their socks up over their shoes, and sometimes they would tape that together, etc. So never learned to tie their shoes, got frustrated, couldn't do it. but pretty good mathematician and physicist. His name is Albert Einstein, right? So, and yes, I believe neurologically he fits the profile of neurodivergent. So it's equipping as needed. Thirdly is encouragement. The population, the people group, the tribe of neurodivergent persons, whether formally diagnosed, informally diagnosed, whatever, is so discouraged, is so disconnected, is so frustrated. And so if there's one thing that we can do that brings such great meaning, it's to encourage other people. And this we do each day. We find points of engagement to encourage people each day. And it's wonderful. I spoke with a 20-something-year-old guy on Monday who was just so isolated and felt so discouraged. And just to be able to step back and approach engaging him on his journey in his life was made quite a difference. So we do a lot of that encouraging. Let's see, I want to add a couple of things too. I'm going to step back a bit and say that we do not subscribe to the deficit medical model. This is very important because for over 90 years, our culture has subscribed to this idea that neurodivergent persons need to be examined, they need to be fixed, they need to be medicated, they need to be put into padded rooms. It's true. And this kind of thinking that neurodivergent persons are broken has been the soil and the fertilizer to grow an entire understanding, a wrong-headed understanding about neurodivergent persons. It's also created a multi-billion-dollar industry around autism and neurodivergent persons. We reject that. In fact, everything we do is strength-based. We actually use strength-based assessments and approach in our work with people because we feel it levels the playing field, right? And gives people an opportunity to have footing. Lots more to say, but I'm going to kind of stop here. And Gabby, any questions out there? Any things?
Yeah, so David, that was incredibly insightful. And it sounds like the Foundation for Life Guides for Autistics has this foundational philosophy that is transformative in itself, right? And your philosophy has this transformative nature to it that reshapes and rethinks the way in which we elevate people that are neurodivergent. And it's incredible. I have a question for the audience. So we talked a lot about the organization's philosophy and the way in which you operate. So let's start off with this. I think this is a good primer from the audience. What are some challenges of a neurodiverse workforce? So you talked a little bit about the outcomes of some challenges, but would love to hear some specific challenges that you see arise that you're working against and through.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. Good primer. Before I do the primer answer, let me state that, and I think this is foundational to our conversation. It's part of our language. Is this understanding of neurodiversity? Okay, we all of us, those who are at this moment walking around, breathing on this planet, are a part of a neurodiverse population of human beings. When we think of neurodiversity, it simply means, and this is subtracting it all down, but it simply means that we all think neuro differently. We are diverse. There's a beauty, there's a rainbow, there's a complete biosphere of neurology, and we're all a part of that. So all of us have this unique place. When we think of neurodivergent persons, they are diverging from the norm, right? They're not neurotypical, they're neurodivergent. So in that place, we come to this answering of this question, right? Because in the workplace, which is, an extension of our culture, an extension of our cultural understandings and our fixations, whether they're wrong or right, we find this contrast, right, between neurotypical, neuronormative, and neurodivergent thinkers. And this has been the point of so much pain, so much unnecessary misunderstanding. Let's just take one aspect, this social dynamic that occurs in the workplace. We have social dynamics outside the workplace, of course, but in the workplace, there has been a misunderstanding about the way that neurodivergent people engage socially in a workplace setting. In fact, and here's just one sub aspect. That is, there's so many, but let's pick this one. Eye contact. Eye contact. And I'm going to tell you that when I was very young, I was told that to be trustworthy, to exude an air of confidence and trustworthiness, I needed to make eye contact. And so I practiced untold numbers of hours staring at myself in the mirror, looking into my own pupils, saying this was necessary so that people would trust me. So a neurodivergent person in a workplace, they are processing sensory processing disorder, integration, etc., whatever. They are processing a lot of information that has nothing to do with staring into the eyes of other people. So when you take this cultural expectation and place it on top of that workplace norm that, people here at work look into each other's eyes. Well, for a neurodivergent person, they're typically going to find that to be very distracting. It's going to throw, a proverbial wrench into the gears of their neurological processing and input. And it's not comfortable, but we expect it to happen. Now, I've been able to speak with HR managers, hiring managers, CEOs, many people in context of these workplace expectations. And I've been telling people, it is not necessary for somebody to be productive and engaged in the workplace to stare into your eyes, right? I'll add one more thing. It's been my great joy to work with so many people internationally and interface with so many different cultures. And one of my board members from India, remarkable man, also neurodivergent, autistic, told me about 6 months ago, he said, David, in many places in my country, if you go into small villages in tribal centers and you stare into the eyes of other people, they take it as a personal affront and a lack of respect. So, here we are sort of demanding this eye contact. And that's just one thing. I mean, we can go to handshakes, other things, all these little norms that occur in the workplace, which need to be examined. They really do. I hope that's helpful to give some insight on that primer.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're talking about this neurotypical, cultural, normative, professional world that we work in, right? And really reframing what that looks like to be more inclusive. So I think that's incredibly helpful. And you talk a lot about these social expectations and social norms that can be barriers to people who are neurodivergent. I'm curious, what are some of the professional implications of these norms, but also the professional implications of people that are neurodivergent working in these very neuronormative cultures and preventing them from being successful in their careers?
Well, let's address one thing right up front, and that is sort of this cultural expectation in the workplace that if someone is autistic, they're they've divulged that, or perhaps there's just the suspicion that people are neurodivergent. if that's the case, then there's this cultural norm that says that the career choice, whether this person chooses it or not, the career choice for that person is obviously in technology. They need to be a programmer. They need to be a coder. They need to be involved in computer sciences, right? Now, let me say that there are quite a few people that I've worked with who are interested in tech, right? When they're programmers, cybersecurity, so on. They're logical construct thinkers. So we've got some different neurotype pathways of thinking, and they just fit well with that. We do an assessment, we discover that that's really their area to be in, etc. Right? But there are many, many people, the majority of neurodivergent autistic persons who have no interest in tech, right? And so it's wrongheaded and inappropriate for us to do that to people, to sort of like, oh, hi, how are you? Nice to meet you. Now you need to go into tech, right? It's just wrong. We need to explore and discover the actual strengths and the actual aspirations of these people. I have worked with autistic people who have become great cooks, gardeners, librarians, and so on. I work with a couple of people who are in museum sciences. They're input driven. It's one of our strengths. And it's not tech, right? So that's one aspect. We just need to stop doing that to other people, right? Because you're X, you need to be in here. That's
Right.
ridiculous.
Yeah, siloing people,
Yeah.
and really stifling the opportunities that are available and of interest to them. I love that. And we're talking a lot about some of these challenges. I really want to work into talking about your coaching program and what it does when not only serving neurodiverse people, but thinking about targeting people that are neurotypical, right? So I know your organization works and provides training with neurotypical people within companies as well. So would love to hear a little bit about that process and how that benefits both neurotypical people and neurodiverse people in the workplace.
Sure. Thanks, Gabby. Well, there's two aspects. The first aspect of that approach is addressing addressing the idea of cultural misappropriations, misunderstandings, biases, and so on. Right? We want to approach that large picture, because if you don't, if you just approach the sort of mechanics and process of workplace, you're not going to really see change, right? Because you might see some little incremental changes, but you'll see this backflow because you've not changed the culture that will just simply overwhelm those mechanics and process changes. So that bigger picture, that landscape, we challenge those in dialogue and training, in presentations with corporations, and we've been able to work with some Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies in doing that. So it's been exciting to be a part of a process change, but addressing that, and I would say being able to open the window, open the doors, and have authentic, engaging dialogue is very important. Bringing autistic, neurodivergent people into the conversation, right? The old saying, nothing about us without us, right? Bringing them into the conversation. And by the way, I think it's a good moniker. I'll keep it. And demonstrating the full, authentic humanness of each of these people and their place of belonging in a workplace culture. So that's huge. That's absolutely huge. We hear a lot, and I have in my hashtag and LinkedIn at DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and of course it's growing now. That's great. But this idea we've had for so long about diversity being enough, right? And I know that I'm in good company, because you guys at Power to Fly think this way too, this transformational thinking. So love it. But this idea that diversity is enough, it's not. We need to actually create pathways for actual full inclusion. And
Mm-hmm.
that includes all minds, in addition to all ethnicities, social backgrounds, and so on. All persons, right? Fully included in inclusivity.
Right.
Um, Secondly, is just this addressing of mechanics. There's so much to be done. Um, let's just say the interview process itself can be a proverbial minefield
Mm-hmm.
for neurodivergent persons. Um, for example, the old mechanics, the tried and true mechanics of interviewing, can oftentimes be very, very disruptive and very intimidating for neurodivergent people who, if given the job and given the opportunity, could flourish and be an incredible asset to the company. But they
Right.
have to get through that tunnel, that hurdle to get there. About 3 weeks ago, I had a neurodivergent person I was working with in coaching, and they told me about an interview that the person on the interview opened the interview with this. We're going to give you a set of 10 questions. You will have exactly 2 minutes to answer them. So if you would, let's get ready for this interview. Here's the first question. Okay, what you've done is you've immediately taken a logic construct thinker, a neurodivergent person, and you've just tripped them up. They
Mm-hmm.
weren't expecting it. They didn't know the format, anything, and the pressure and heat is on,
Right.
right? Given time to process appropriately, work through the logic, work through the constructs, they probably do great. But
Right.
you've already stopped that. And that's just one of many, many problems in an interview process. For example, the mechanic.
Yeah, I love this. So you're really talking about the two-way street here, right? It's not about people who are neurodivergent fitting the square peg into a round hole of the external world. It's about having the world be inclusive, right? And I love the concept of not just focusing on diversity, right? That's the surface level. If you have people that are neurodiverse that are applying, are they actually getting the job? And then if they get the job, do they actually feel included? Do they actually have equity, and equitable chance in the company? So I love all those concepts. I have a couple questions from the audience, and two folks, Becca and Lisa, both asked, have you heard of workplaces actually leading engagement exercises that are inclusive of neurodivergent folks?
I'm going to tread into answering this very carefully. And I'll tell you why. Because I love it when I see um, an effort, an energy put forward that is well-meaning, right? That is from a good place, a good heart, whether it's corporation or individuals. Um, I love that, and I don't want to suppress that. I'm going to encourage it. I'd rather take that, help fix that. In fact, we've just been called in as consultants to fix one program that left the tracks and hit the wall in a workplace engagement with neurodivergent persons. So I will say that it is highly problematic and inappropriate to approach the engagement and inclusion of neurodivergent thinkers and human persons by putting them into boxes, by giving them labels and providing compartments for them. There are several well-meaning large corporations who have engaged in autism at work initiatives. They even call it neurodiversity at work initiatives. Not entirely appropriate, but that's okay. And they have inadvertently, they may mean well, but they've inadvertently created chaos by doing that. And I had a conversation about a year ago with a senior, highly skilled, highly certified person in the UK who was in tears as I was talking to him, because he told me that he had disclosed in the workplace that he was neurodivergent, autistic, and immediately was approached by management. They said, "We've got a spot for you." He said, "Well, I'm working just fine in this spot." I mean, he showed incredible productivity, engagement, great reviews. They took him and put him in this special Autism at Work, Neurodiversity at Work program. And he said, through tears, "David, suddenly I had 4 bosses who would check on me every hour. They moved me physically into another building and made all these assumptions and began talking to me like this. Now we're going to," and it was just demeaning,
Right.
demoralizing. It's not our job to create more compartments. It's our job to break the walls down of these compartments.
Yeah, I love that. And that kind of leads into a question from Lisa. I misspoke. The last question was from Joanna as well, but this one's from Lisa. And she asks, what are good ways for corporate cultures to ensure that it's safe for neurodivergent people to disclose? And you sort of talked about, right, when somebody did disclose, how they were treated. So there, even when people do disclose, right, and they do get to that level, there's many mistakes that can follow. But how can companies and cultures set this inclusive environment for people to feel safe enough to show up authentically and disclose themselves?
Thanks, Gabby. Well, 2 things. First of all, is I would lean back into that earlier conversation on creating workplace culture, right? That's got to be first. But secondly, is what would it look like to disclose safely and respectfully in a workplace? I've worked with several people who have done exactly that. It disclosed in their workplace, created a lot of anxiety and a lot of fearfulness. But here's what we did, and kudos, I won't mention name, to the companies that engaged in this process. We prepared carefully, thoughtfully about how to disclose effectively. And I could tell you the step 1, 2, or 3 that the company would take in response to this disclosure. And sure enough, every time step 1, 2, and 3 were engaged in. That's fine. We knew what to be ready for. Having a well thought out approach to disclosure is critical. I would not recommend to anyone, and by the way, the majority of neurodivergent persons are undisclosed in the workplace. I'll say that again, they're undisclosed. They're fearful. They're highly anxiety about being discovered for who they really are.
Right.
I talk to them every day. I know. So back to these mechanics, we put in place a logical response. We think through and dialogue when we work with someone, dialogue with them as to what the disclosure is going to gain them, what it's going to look like, how it's going to look in the future. And these mechanics might be at that moment of disclosure, and we know it's going to go to HR and so on. At that moment of disclosure, right, they're going to pull out the dusty books. Okay, let's flip over to section 10, and this is what we do. Okay, put away the books, right? Talk to people.
Right.
So, so you've got accommodations, right? At this moment of asking for fair, appropriate accommodations is at that moment of disclosure, right? Because it's not going to be like, 2 months go by and now it's time to ask for accommodations. It's going to be right then.
Right.
So, yeah.
We got the signal. Yeah, I appreciate, David, you have so much to say. We had so many questions we didn't answer, but quickly, can you just tell us how our audience can find out about your work and find you beyond today?
Of course. We offer no-cost consultations called Insight Consultations, available at NeuroGuides, one word, neuroguides.org. And Gabby, if you could post that in chat, that'd be helpful too.
Yeah, Hunter, if you could do that, that'd be great. Thank you so much for this conversation. I appreciate it, and we will talk soon, David. Take care.
Thanks, Gabby.